A mass shooting in the state of Maine with at least 22 people dead and many more injured.
14 students and one teacher are dead, killed after a shooting at an elementary school in Uvalde, Texas.
At least 58 people now dead, more than 500 people wounded in a horrific shooting on the Las Vegas Strip. It's the deadliest mass shooting in modern United States history.
Mass shooting.
Mass shooting. A mass shooting.
Mass shooting.
Mass shooting.
Mass shooting, a term that has unfortunately become more popular over the past few years. After every mass shooting, there are outcries from both sides of the political spectrum. Liberals calling for gun control, and conservatives advocating for the Second Amendment right to bear arms. This is obviously a very heated topic, but if we were to implement gun control laws, would they restrict a person's freedom? The first route to go is by looking at the Second Amendment right to a well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state. Living under a tyrannical government in an unfree state infringes upon a person's freedoms. Many people like to use the part of the Second Amendment about militia as a way to advocate for guns, and having guns in case the government does become tyrannical is fair. While it is true that citizens would be less free under a tyrannical government, it's only true during a time of true tyranny, like during the colonial era when colonists were under the tyrannical rule of King George. In the current condition of the United States, there is no true tyranny. Robert Spitzer, in his critique on gun rights, talks about militia and says that we do not need arms for a militia, but rather the amendment states that the government needs to be able to form a militia if small insurrections occur. Spitzer says that people currently using the Second Amendment's portion on militia when advocating for gun rights is deficient. He states insurrection should not happen against the government over mere disagreements of policy, and that there should only ever be forceful oppositions to the government when the government attempts to, quote, take away and destroy the property of the people, reduce them to slavery under arbitrary power, or put themselves into a state of war with the people, a quote from John Locke. Thus, bringing up this argument in the current condition of the United States is not an effective way of advocating for citizens to own guns, because the government is not currently tyrannical just because a citizen might disagree with the law. But this doesn't answer the question about a person's freedom. I think the question on whether gun control restricts freedom dates back all the way to the 6th century, where in the Pandects of Justinian, the Byzantine Empire brings up the phrase vim vi repellere licet, which directly translates to, it is permitted to repel with force. This phrase gave citizens the right to self-defense against external threats to their property or livelihood. Essentially, the right to self-defense has been a concept since at least the Byzantine Empire, and very likely since long before. Modern-day philosophers such as Michael Huemer continue to touch on the topic of self-defense. Huemer states that as humans we have the right to self-defense, and this holds true in the United States. Does this mean that we should be allowed firearms, or should we rely on the police to protect us? Huemer brings up the idea that many of us feel safe without having to own guns, and this makes us quick to think that just because we don't need guns, why would anyone else need guns? Well, there are many people that live in fear of others that threaten their lives, whether it be family members, criminals, or ex-lovers. Huemer calls forth the case of Ruth Burnell, who called the police department to tell them that her husband informed her that he was on his way to the house to kill her. The police told her to call back when he was actually there, but she didn't have the time to call back because she was killed immediately. Huemer's point in bringing up this example is not to say that her having a gun would have saved her, but rather that the police have no obligation to protect her. Burnell's family attempted to sue the city, but the trial was almost immediately dismissed on the grounds that the city simply, quote, never had any duty to protect Burnell. The government has no obligation to protect us as citizens. It's up to us to protect ourselves. And in the situation of Burnell, a gun would have been the only way she could have protected herself. Not because her husband had a gun, but because he was so much stronger and had beaten her before. A gun would have been the only way for her to match his power. Well, banning guns would mean that only criminals would have guns, and thus people wouldn't be able to protect themselves from said guns. A gun control advocate might say, there's no point to outlawing murder because murderers will murder people anyway to counter this. While this seems to make sense, it diverges completely from the idea of having a gun. By not outlawing guns, citizens are being provided with a way to protect themselves in the form of a gun. While not outlawing murder, on the other hand, would put citizens in even more danger because people would go back to their state of nature and start murdering people. But the state of nature is a topic for a whole nother video. Outlawing people from murdering obviously doesn't entirely eliminate murder, but it punishes people who do commit murder, and as such, deters people from murdering. The same cannot be said about guns, because the people that would give up their guns to the government would be law-abiding citizens that had guns to protect themselves. They would lose this ability and could be left at the hands, quite literally, of their much stronger abusive spouse, as in the case of Brunel. Another philosopher, Thomas Wells, also touches on the philosophy of gun control. He brings up similar points in the gun debate, but also touches on the statistics. After every mass shooting, there's heartbreak for the victims. We ask ourselves, how could this ever happen? And could this happen to me? But Wells puts into perspective the numbers of gun deaths. In the U.S. in 2016, there were roughly 2.6 million deaths. Of those, 33,000 were caused by guns. That's only a little over 1% of the total. Of those 33,000, 22,000 were suicides, leaving only 11,000 to be by homicide. Wells argues that even if we were to get rid of all the guns in America, people would still find ways to kill each other. Mass shootings, of course, are heartbreaking, but their toll on the overall deaths in the United States is very insignificant. Here's a graphic from the leading causes of death in 2022. As you can see, guns aren't even a part of the graphic. Guns really don't count for as many deaths as we might think. I think it was worthwhile to bring up these statistics because if we were to get rid of guns, the overall death toll for homicides would likely go up, as people wouldn't be able to defend themselves as well. Thus, by getting rid of guns, citizens would be less free than they were when having guns because they wouldn't have a way to protect themselves from someone much more powerful. Wells brings up another good point, saying, quote, "In a country with 320 million people and the poor funding of mental health services, there's always going to be murderous loonies making the national news somewhere." News channels will make much more money talking about a mass shooting than talking about the hundreds of thousands of deaths due to heart disease. With these murderous loonies, I think we should be focusing on the mental health of the U.S. rather than getting rid of all guns. I'm certainly not happy about the current state of things with there being so many guns in our nation, and I think it's more complicated than saying there should or shouldn't be guns. I believe we should restrict certain people from accessing guns, make guns more difficult to obtain, and remove guns from people that are considered threats. I think we as a nation need to look more into the mental health of all of our people, rather than focusing just on gun control. With this being the end of the video, I hope I didn't offend you with what I went over. Here's a picture of my dog because I hope to end this video with more positive vibes. While I, as much as anyone else, hate mass shootings and gun violence, it would be more damning of our freedom to implement gun control than it would be to allow citizens the right to defend themselves. Thank you for watching all the way to the end, and I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day.